Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. FPL Vincenzo here, and we're officially 1 day away from the Gameweek 1 deadline. Said on a few recent pods that I would share some of my drafts up until this point and share with you my final draft, which now hasn't changed for 2 days. So I'm getting there. I don't see major changes now in my final draft, so I think I'm pretty much set for Gameweek 1. And sort of set in my chip plan, or as set as I can be in my chip plan. But the purpose of this pod, rather than just do here's my current draft and tell everyone why I picked the players I have, I thought I'll have a look at 6 drafts I've made from the moment the game launched up until this point. They're all subtly different. The approach and the mindset and the strategy around each pick is subtly different, and it's a way to cover a lot of the popular players in the game and discuss my thoughts around them. Discuss why I've drifted away from certain players, why sort of some players have come in more into my view, onto my radar, and talk through certain teams, certain players in a more structured way. So we'll jump straight into it and have a look at where I was when the game launched. And my first thought was I wanted Haaland and Bruno because I expected them both to be highly owned. I thought they'd probably go into Game Week 1 above 50%. I didn't really want to take either on. I had no reason to take either on. I thought the fixtures were there for Man United early on. I thought Haaland would be a strong captaincy for many of the first 3 weeks. My mind hasn't really changed on either of those 2 points, but could I get a good team around owning both? Because spending 27.5 million on those 2 players, when you can only captain one of them each week, felt significant. But ultimately, my decision was, and how I normally play FPL, is to cover the high EO players and look to stay with the pack, as I mentioned in the pod I released earlier this week. So they were both in. I thought the 6 million striker bracket was quite competitive. I looked at Brian Brobby at Sunderland. I thought I really liked these first couple of fixtures. Promoted team, obviously up first away to Ipswich. And I think at this point, Igor Jesus at Nottingham Forest looked quite good. We thought he'd play centre forward again. Their early fixtures were fine. He was my in July, my initial pick for someone who may start quickly in the game. We get it from year to year. I remember Mikel Antonio at West Ham a couple of years ago was really good for about 7-8 game weeks and then couldn't score any more goals for like the 15 that followed. Jesus looked like one of those that could hit the ground running early on and maybe get 3 or 4 goals in the first block. So I like the look of both of them, 2 6 million strikers. Say Sunderland were a big part of this. Dan Ballard was in with Brian Brobby. Ballard, a little bit of goal threat, maybe some DEFCON. So I quite like the look of him. And maybe the more other controversial one was Anton Stack, who was one of the better DEFCON midfielders last year. Might have been on some set pieces, might have been on some free kicks. Capable of a long range shot, capable of DEFCON. Leads his fixtures again, not too bad. Seemed like the sort of player that could do well. Joel Hatto also in this draft because my gut feeling was when Xabi Alonso joined Chelsea, he would play a back 4. Cucurella was on his way to Real Madrid. I didn't really see another out-and-out left-back at this point for Chelsea. So Hatto at 4.5 looked like he could be a cheap route into that Chelsea defence. I thought they'd go with, say, him left-back, Colwell, maybe Fofana at that point, and Reece James or something as the first choice back 4. Obviously, new signings have arrived since to change the mindset, move the goalpost, shall we say. But that was my initial draft. Quite DEFCON heavy with James Garner in there, who's since got injured, Anton Stack. I thought Ballard and Maguire weren't too bad as a balance between DEFCON and goal threat. But looking back now, this draft feels not amateurish to me, but I look at it and think this doesn't really satisfy any criteria. It's not full out attack. It's not full on DEFCON. It's kind of bits and pieces of everything. It's a bit of a pick and mix team almost. And I think it's important to have a strategy. And the more I think about this season as a whole, the more I want to commit to something. I think it's very easy in this game to try and keep your options open, try and keep balance, try and stay flexible. But when you do that, you don't really maximise anything. Where if you commit to an early wild card, if you commit to a bench boost in this week, it means you can really load up your team with a sole purpose. And if you're really trying to do well at this game and achieve the best you can in this game, I think you'll do better sticking to a plan and then maximising towards that rather than staying flexible, keeping options open where you sort of 70% commit to a plan, which I think this draft does a little bit. It's fine. It is probably at this point it would have been good enough to run for a while without needing to wildcard, but it's not the strongest team. It's stable. It's fine. If you was playing a draft game of FPL and you ended up with this squad, you probably wouldn't be too dissatisfied. But yeah, I look at it now and think I don't massively like this. Then I moved on to draft 2. I gave it a week or so, let the game calm down, let a couple of transfers happen, some more preseason friendlies happen. And then I had another look in week 2. So 2 more Man City players came in, looked at the treble up. I think Elliot Anderson is quite fairly priced at 6.5. I think the thought and the opinion was that DEFCON wouldn't be a problem. That was obviously a concern to start with. He's changed club. Will he still get DEFCON? I think he probably still will. And for his price, I think he's a decent own. I think at that sort of the amount they've paid to bring him in. He's the only person they've brought in amongst quite a lot of sales. But I think Anderson will be as nailed as anyone in this Man City team. So for 6.5 million, someone that can get DEFCON, someone that might take a couple of set pieces, someone that maybe will get a little bit more advanced than he would at Forest, maybe a few more shots than he managed at Forest. It's a good own, I think. So I think he came in, and then Josko Gvardiol came in. This was around the time when Enzo Maresca came out and said Gvardiol is one of the 3 pillars of the squad with Phil Foden and Erling Haaland. That made me think, yeah, Gvardiol is going to get a lot of minutes here. I know from how Maresca played at Chelsea that he likes a left-sided build-up player. None of the other left-footed players are build-up players. The likes of O'Reilly, Aït-Nouri, these sort of guys want to go forward. Mark Gahey is fine playing on the left, but he's not left-footed. I do think that makes a difference. So I thought Gvardiol would, assuming he stayed fit, get quite a lot of minutes. So I quite liked him early on as an option. Tarkowski come back in, one of my darlings of last year. I enjoyed owning him last season. And although 6 million is a bit of a hefty price for him, I thought that's not bad for a start. He's going to get reliable minutes. He's going to get probable DEFCON, a little bit of goal threat. He's quite a nice, safe and steady pick to start with. So the defence got beefed up here a little bit with Tarkowski and Gvardiol coming in for Ballard and Maguire. I looked at Arsenal a bit more. I've said in again, one of my other pods that once I committed really to bench boost 1, I wanted more Arsenal in there. And I really wanted the Arsenal striker against Coventry. This was before we really knew about Solis so much, about security of his minutes. Arsenal was still being linked with Vidi Jr., I think, and stuff at this point. And I looked at the strikers and I thought Havertz, I think, his first choice over Gyökeres. Even if he doesn't start striker, he might play as a number 10, etc., etc. And I just looked at it and thought, well, I've got a chance here to own the Arsenal striker against Coventry. The price is fair. Havertz, when picked, generally does quite well in the game. It's his minutes that are maybe a bit more unreliable. There's a chance to own him. And by this point, João Pedro had started to do well at Chelsea in pre-season, looked one of their biggest threats, Wrigley amongst the returns. So all of a sudden, I needed to beef my strikers up as well. Pedro and Havertz in for Bobby and Jesus. How was I going to fund this? I then reconsidered, do I want Haaland and Bruno? There were signs here that Brian Mbeumo was going to play as a number 9 for Manchester United. Again, if you're playing 2 promoted teams in the first 2 weeks, would you rather have the playmaking number 10 or the goal-scoring number 9? Well, the goal-scoring number 9 for about 4 million saving seemed quite a good idea, particularly as it allowed me to bolster my strike. And all of a sudden now I've got Mbeumo, Havertz and Pedro rather than Fernandes, Bobby and Jesus. So 2 mid-table strikers who are inconsistent. Now I've got 3 sort of top 4 challenging teams in there and arguably the centre forward for all 3 of them. That seemed a lot better. The other kind of anomaly here is Harvey Barnes because Newcastle obviously under new management, Eddie Howe had left. Anthony Gordon had left. I thought Harvey Barnes was a shoo-in effectively to play in the Newcastle front 3. Him, Kevin Schade, players like this, they can be a bit streaky. I think when they get minutes, they can get returns. They're the sort of players in FPL in the past that if you've owned them for the right block of 4 to 6 weeks could be very good. I was kind of loosely on the plan by now to bench boost 1, wildcard 6. I wasn't overly impressed with Liverpool's defending in pre-season at this week for game week 1. I thought, could I carry Harvey Barnes through at 6 million until that first wildcard? Liverpool at St James's Park could be quite nice. He could be a streaky player for a short burst earlier in the season. So he went in. I thought this team was an improvement. Really 15, I guess, trustworthy players. You look at this squad, there's not sort of no what you call weak link. I didn't have a 4 million defender from a promoted team or anything like that. Probably was going to give myself engine headaches though in game weeks 2, 3, 4, and 5 after the bench boost, because say all 15 of these players were pickable. I then moved on to game week 3 and some changes here. This was when I first really started to commit to the idea, do I want to go all out attack? Do I want safe picks or do I want sort of really high ceiling picks? Palestra was looking very good at this point at Chelsea as a wing back, very high positioning, often in the opponent's penalty box. Why would I want to sort of turn that down? That was way more upside than just Gabriel at the same price, who was mainly playing in the, if you look at it as 3-2-5s for Chelsea and Man City, Gavardio was in the 3, Man City in their back line, progressing passes into midfield. Palestra was in the front line for Chelsea and often in central position. So he looked like someone with quite a high ceiling. Fulham also not looking great defensively in pre-season. So that was a big upside pick for game week 1 in particular, Palestra. We know Chelsea sort of game week 4 are very good as well. So he was in place for that. So he looked way more enticing. Then in midfield, Semenyo, Wirtz, and Mbeumo. This trio looks, I think, quite strong. I say Mbeumo, as I said before, playing as a 9. Wirtz basically playing as a second striker alongside Alexander Isak, and Antoine Semenyo looking like there was signs of what Guardiola previously had at Man City with Raheem Sterling and Leroy Sané, where Sterling was often scoring sort of 15, 20 goals a season by basically just tapping balls in at the back post. The purpose was one winger sort of gets into the 6-yard box, squares it across the box, the striker taps it in, or the opposite winger taps it in at the back post. Semenyo felt more like the tapper inner, while Doku was the squarer. And I thought, could Semenyo be regularly amongst the returns here? Quite like the idea of the Man City double up with Haaland as well. So I felt genuine goal threat here from Wirtz playing quite high, different role to what we'd seen last year at Liverpool, where he was maybe playing more as a left forward. Here he was very central, playing very close to Isak, almost, I would say it more like a second striker than a number 10, in Mbeumo as the 9, Semenyo getting lots of touches in the penalty box. That seemed lucrative. Fun that I had to do some downgrades, so out went Havertz again, and Calvert-Lewin, who was looking good in pre-season, came in, and the template sort of front line was formed here with Haaland, Pedro, and Calvert-Lewin. That hasn't really changed since for me. And a little bit of a cheaper bench, but still bench boostable. At this point, Diego Gomez, who's, by the way, now playing tonight in their Europa League game, so any fears around his minutes after a pre-season injury seem to be quashed. So I think he's still a good pick now for game week 1. He came in and Issa Diop, safe minutes for Ipswich. And a big change of opinion from me on that Ipswich-Sunderland game in game week 1, where initially I thought this is a really strong fixture for Sunderland, hence picking Ballard and Robbie. Now maybe I can have a 4 million Ipswich defender, and maybe even if they concede 1, if he can get some DEFCON or something, that's fine for 1 week. Diop's obviously going to be nailed in that Ipswich defence. So, yeah, cheaper bench, maybe not so deep of a squad, but sort of a very powerful midfield 3 there, the template strikers, and a bit more attacking in the defence. Quite like the idea of Donnarumma in goal at that point as well. I thought he was a bit more of my tried and tested rule is to have 1 premium keeper with 1 cheaper one. Donnarumma tick that box. So yeah, he was there. On to game week 4, and maybe I pushed the boat out a little bit more here. And again, another sort of change in direction in some ways. So I kept Calafiori, Palestra, and Trey Hume came in because there was leaks and reports of Sunderland using him as in their front 3 in multiple friendlies. That's surely worth a 0.5 upgrade over Issa Diop, who's got a higher ceiling in game week 1 in that Ipswich Sunderland fixture. It's Hume. Wirtz dropped out because I thought, or maybe Isak's the option. Calvert-Lewin is fine up front, but Isak's more explosive. I think, and I still not completely discarded the idea that in this first 5 game weeks, Liverpool might be the highest scoring team. So I was considering that and thinking, if they are going to be the highest scoring team, do I want Isak on penalties or do I want Wirtz? Maybe I'd rather have Isak, so I dabbled with putting him in. Ismail Assar was in briefly because he's a set and forget 6.5 big goal scoring midfielder. Seemed like the sort of midfielder that would work well under Rose, but there was sort of some background noise about whether he would still be at the club. That's picked up again in recent days around maybe moving to Turkey. So if he was going to be in the league for 6.5 million, I think he's quite cheap. And in my radar now, he's still there as someone I might bring in game week 4. Hence why I start with Solis and then move to Salah at the same price. To fund Isak, could I get away with playing 2 cheap midfielders? So I say Joel Gomez, or Diego Gomez, I should say, for Brighton looked a safe pick. Was a wide player who could get DEFCON, a wide player who could get attacking returns. And then Slater comes in from Hull. Of all the 4.5 million mids, he looks the most nailed for game week 1. Maybe there's an argument now for George Hemmings of Aston Villa. Maybe there's a few others as well. But I still like, if you just want someone to play in game week 1, get 2 points for the bench boost. I don't hate the thought of putting Slater in and then leaving him third on the bench until the wildcard period. And he can still maybe play here 4-3-3, and Hume and Gomez are the other 2 sort of default subs. You can play Calafiori, Palestra, Maguire, Mihajlovic all the time. And it means you're getting more money onto the pitch, isn't it? Your defence is basically a 4.5 and a 5 million mid on the bench with a 4.5 defender. That feels quite good. And I've not written off the idea of going in with 2 cheap midfielders if it allows you to beef up other things if you really want to. Maybe if you're looking at a draft where you really want Haaland, Fernandes and Gabriel, that's one way of affording that, is to go with Gomez and Slater. Just play Slater for 1 week, accept 2 points if he gets them. If he happens to get some DEFCON or maybe a cheeky assist or something, that's fine. And it could work out. I think it's for the bench boost. I don't hate the thought of literally just picking someone for 1 week and then leaving them third on the bench. Whether that's a cheap striker, whether that's a 4 million defender like Leif Davis, whether that's a 4.5 million midfielder like Slater, I think that could work. I think a lot of people are seeing Gomez now as their 5th mid. Don't hate the thought of using him as a 4th mid and maybe just accepting 4-3-3 as the go-to formation with Gomez now first on the bench rather than 2nd or 3rd. Maybe even you want to play him a bit more. Brighton's fixtures, sort of game week 3, game week 4 aren't bad either. So you could play him rather than just resort to leaving him on the bench all the time. 2 to go then. So into draft 5. And this is where I dabbled with Gabriel. First draft of mine with triple Arsenal. I kind of, again, still wanted, I like the idea of having triple Arsenal against Coventry. And obviously, I think done the pod by this point where I looked at Bench Boost 1 versus Bench Boost 2, and the money fixture in the first 2 game weeks is that Arsenal-Coventry game, according to bookmaker odds. Solis, this was before the Community Shield, but Solis still looked good in pre-season for minutes. Martinelli, I think, had been linked with moves away. Trossard had already gone. The Vini Jr. rumours had dried up. I thought Solis is definitely going to play here now at the start, and I'd identified that plan of having Solis turn into Sarr. So I like that idea. Sangare, I kept coming back to, and Anderson I kept coming back to and thinking DEFCON is still sort of the backbone of the team. I still probably should have some more DEFCON players in there. So I'd kind of shied away a bit from sort of the all-out attack draft and suddenly was looking more at a 3-5-2 as a regular thing, or a 3-4-3, and looking to maybe I could bench Solis in game week 3 or game week 2 is a way to Villa in game week 2. He could do very well there, but I wouldn't be against benching him and playing Calvert-Lewin in that sort of week. But ultimately, I think the where I got to with this one is that front 8's too good. I'm going to hesitate to bench any of those, and I'm going to make a bad choice. It's probably a bit too heavy on DEFCON players to start with. I still stand by, I think, after wild card and through the main main course of the season. We're in the starter period now. In the main course of the season, I think DEFCON will be essential to have that foundation of 4 or 5 DEFCON picks, but not at the start. Also in this draft, I'd kind of drifted away from Man United a little bit. I'd gone from some drafts having Maguire, Bruno and Mbeumo to now having none. And I don't overly rate Man United. I think they'll be fine, but I'm not as keen on them as some managers are. And I was purely picking them because of the 2 opponents they had in the first 2 weeks rather than their own individual quality. Was I right to do that? I think there was some speculation at this point how nailed was in Mbeumo. I probably still thought he was quite safe, but I was looking at it and thinking he could be a transfer waiting to happen. I'd already kind of identified Solis as a transfer waiting to happen. Did I want 2 of them? So, and ultimately, where did I stand with Gabriel versus Bruno Fernandes? I think I was looking at it here more thinking double Arsenal defence was a differential. And I was hesitating on a lot of the defenders. I've got to say, in these drafts, I've had so many different ones. I've had a Tarkowski, I've had a Ballard, I've had a Palestra, I've had a Gavardiol. And ultimately, I was just being very indecisive with defenders. I couldn't commit to anyone outside of Calafiori. He was the only defender that's been in every draft I've had. And I just thought, why am I hesitating like this? The best defender in the game is Gabriel. Just put him in. And it sort of cancels out all of these concerns. Put him in first and then see what you can afford. And then I went away and thought about it and thought, well, hang on. I'm playing for 5 weeks. Gabriel is 2 million more than Tarkowski, 3 million more than Harry Maguire. Is he going to get enough points in this run over 5 weeks to justify that being the position to spend another 2.5 million, 3 million? My strategy was quite short term. And I looked at it and thought, no, probably not. That's a lot of money. I can see myself again on wildcard going for Gabriel. Again, goalposts may have moved with Konsa going to Arsenal now. Maybe people look at it and think, why am I paying 8 million for Gabriel when I can have Ezri Konsa for 4.5? If we think they'll be the first choice pair until Saliba comes back, we'll know more by the wildcard time. But I'm not against owning Gabriel from the wildcard onwards. I think he's a good own at 8 million. I think he'll comfortably get 160, 170 points. And for 8 million, I don't think that's bad value. So value for money, I think he's still fine. For a longer stint of the season, I think he's a safe own. But for 5 weeks here, if I've got 2.5 million to upgrade someone, am I better off upgrading a 5.5 million defender to him or spending it somewhere else? And I think ultimately I decided I was going to spend it somewhere else. So there was elements of this draft I wasn't very happy with. And this is where I've ended up. So this is my current draft. I said I've been on it all week. Haven't changed anything, I think, since Monday. And I don't really see myself changing things again. So it's for Bruggen and Kinski in goal. I think they rotate quite nicely. For the first 5 weeks, it's 9 million spent in goal. It's not overspending budget on goalkeepers. I'm not against people buying a Raya if they want. I can see the logic to doing it. But I'm happy to rotate these 2 for the first 5 weeks. And I think you generally get a home game off one of them every week. I think it's quite a nice rotation. I've now put Ben White in the Gabriel spot. Looking at the latest updates on Yuri and Timber, I don't think he's going to play before the international break, which is obviously when I'm likely to wildcard. So White should be first choice if he can stay fit. So I've got 2 Arsenal fullbacks who could get forward, could get attacking returns. We know from Arsenal, particularly when they play Odegaard as the 10, that he's someone that likes to drop deep. He's not a traditional number 10 who likes to play back to goal, turn on the ball. He's more of an 8 in terms of coming deep and facing the play. That puts more pressure on deeper midfielders and fullbacks to get into high advanced positions in number 10 spots. So I think there's opportunity for White and Calafiori to get attacking returns in these first few games. I guess White could be a minute's risk before game week 5. I know Konsa is now joining. Is it possible that Konsa comes in sort of game week 3, game week 4 and goes centre-back with Gabriel and Mosquera gets a game or 2 at right-back? Yes, that is possible. Is it possible Calafiori misses a game or 2 because of Hincapié? Yes, that's possible. But I'm quite confident for the first 2 or 3 weeks here that Calafiori and White will play. I've already mentioned Palestra being quite high advanced attacking. White and Palestra are the same price. If I have to do a move in game week 4 to get Palestra at home to Hull from Ben White, I'm open to doing that. But I'm happy enough with White for 3 weeks. Harry Maguire joins them again. I had some concern over his minutes from Matthias de Ligt. The latest update is I think he's back training by himself. But again, I don't see a world here where he's back by the international break playing. I do think United will play one of those two with either Lisandro Martinez or Lenny Yoro moving forward. De Ligt, my gut feeling is he's probably first choice over Maguire when fit, but not initially. So White and Maguire, I think, suit my brief of being quite short term. They have routes to points. They could get attacking returns. Maguire from set pieces might sneak some DEFCON. I like this front three moving forward. And then Rodon comes into my team for the first time. The 0.5 saving from Mihajlovic was necessary. Another one who, for a while, I was unsure of the security of minutes. I think he signed a new contract, which might help. And also, we've seen him in pre-season getting more advanced, being called, being given names linked to Mo Salah. So Joe Salah, I think he was being called. So advanced, maybe he can get DEFCON. I'd like to think now his minutes are quite secure. It looks like it's him, Bijol, and Mihajlovic as the first choice. The 0.5 saving is necessary for me for now. And I put Michael Kayode in. It could be Christopher Aguerd. Not 100% fixed on those for the minute, but I wanted Kayode's nailed minutes, where Aguerd's probably not quite so nailed in my eyes. He may still start all 5. But Maguire, I don't necessarily want to play all the games. Kayode could come into my team for 1 or 2 weeks. And if I need him to come in, I'd rather have them secure minutes. So there's a rotation there between Rodon, Kayode and Maguire for the third defender spot. So that's why I've gone for that. And it avoids me picking an Ipswich defender or a Coventry defender or a Sunderland defender. So I'm happy with sort of my rotation of defenders and the minutes I'm going to get before the wild card. Into midfield, I've now ended up with completing the treble Arsenal with Solis. We know that the Coventry right-back Van Ewing likes to get forward. Solis will be up against him in game week 1. I think there's upside there. And as I say, I think he's more of a placeholder if Ismaila Sarr is still a Crystal Palace player in game week 4. I'm happy to have Solis for the first 3. I'm happy if I have to bench him in game week 2, I'm willing to do that. But I think he's another one that attacks the first block nicely. I don't see him as a long-term hold, probably an Elliot Anderson spot long-term here, 6.5 million mid. But Solis to start with is fine. I've also ended up with double Man United midfield in my draft for the first time. So Bruno, again, it turns out I could afford him. And I was having concerns around Wirtz. Would he get early subs? Would Liverpool push Szoboszlai on sort of an 8 to a 10 role, bring Alexis McAllister in? Was Wirtz going to get enough reliable minutes for his price? Wasn't sure. And then Antoine Semenyo, there was more rumour and speculation. Was he going to play wide? Doku, I think, has since got injured. Will that mean Semenyo becomes the chief creative winger? Probably does. If he's wide, what does that mean for his goal threat? So I had hesitancy on that. And watching Man City, particularly in the Community Shield, I wasn't particularly impressed with their attacking shape either. I think it will take some adjustment from Enzo Maresca. So I think Semenyo feels like more of a wait and see now than he did maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. So with doubts over Semenyo, with doubts over Wirtz, I've then defaulted to think, well, Bruno's the safe pick here. I doubt I'll captain him. My plan right now is to captain Haaland still in game weeks 1, 2 and 3 and not Bruno. But he does cover the ownership and I can afford him. So he's in. But I think of the two, I'd still rather have Mbeumo for this initial block. I think he's quite a bargain, 8.5 million, if we think he's going to start up front, at least for the first 2 weeks. Again, I'm viewing him as a bit of a placeholder for Morgan Rogers if Rogers starts really well for Chelsea. So I'm not booking in, but I've got routes here that I can get White to Palestra if needed. I can get Mbeumo to Rogers if needed. I can get Solis to Sarr if needed. Even Bruno, I'm not unhappy to downgrade to Cole Palmer if needed. So there's ways here and there's options to move to more Chelsea players in game week 4 if I really want to attack 4 and 5 with them and have more Chelsea players against Hull. I said in my last video about being aggressive, that includes using transfers early on. Final midfielder is Sangare from Brentford. He feels to me I think he'll be the player who's likely to be in a lot of teams very quickly. I think he'll get DEFCON a lot. I think he'll be box to box a lot. I think he's got a little bit of goal threat. At 5.5 million, I can see him rising in price very quickly. And as much as I didn't want DEFCON picks early on because I want to really attack, I was looking at the 5.5 million mids and I wasn't really seeing anyone I was happy to attack the fixtures with. It's not like I could have at that price a Kevin Schade or someone like that. They're 6 million. So at 5.5, I thought I'll put Sangare in now. He's probably going to be there for the season. And I'll just accept all the price rises. I don't think it'll be long before he's up to 5.8, 5.9, even 6 million. Just start with him, play him every week, and that's fine. And then Gomez looks the best budget midfielder to start with. I say the news that he starts in Europa League tonight is helpful. And he can go on the bench most weeks. Not against, again, playing him in game week 3, game week 4, if it looks like it's a good idea. Brighton do have some fixtures that could be nice. And then up front, I say we're on the template here of Calvert-Lewin, Pedro, Haaland. It's quite safe. It's quite stable. Do I really want to mess around with a Havertz and an Isak and potentially have the headaches that rotation might bring with Havertz or injury might bring with Isak? I don't think. If I could go to Isak and downgrade Bruno, would I rather have Bruno and Calvert-Lewin or Isak and Semenyo or something? I think I feel better with Bruno and Calvert-Lewin. So I don't think this draft is completely all-out attack. I dabbled with it. I mentioned it in my last pod that I really wanted to adopt that mindset to go all-out attack. This is more attacking than I normally would be early on, with Mbeumo's sort of concerning minutes, Solis being new to the league, being open-minded to book in quite so many transfers. I am playing way more short-term than normal. There's 3 or 4 players here that might last 2 or 3 weeks in this team, and I'll have to sell them. I'm trying to attack this first 2 weeks. I think Arsenal are the best team to attack game week 1. I've got a treble up. Man United are the best team to attack the first 2 weeks. I've got a treble up. I've got routes to get treble Chelsea by game week 4, which I think is good. So yeah, I've ended up with this. But I don't see massive changes now between now and the end. And I think I'll be very close to this by the deadline. So yeah, there we are. This will be my last pod, obviously, before game week 1. Let's see how well I start. Bench boost will be activated for game week 1. Hopefully get a strong start. Certainly be hoping to get a rank in the top sort of 500k if I've got the bench boost active. And let's hope that we're focused on 2 good teams here in Arsenal and Man United. So let's hope they start well for me. I've got way more trust in them teams than sort of pushing the likes of Sunderland, who no doubt could do well, but maybe less reliable than Arsenal and Man United. Let's hope for a strong start, get into a strong position early, and then build the template from there on that early wild card. Hope you like this sort of method of sharing my game week 1 draft, my thought process sort of through the weeks. If you like this video, please subscribe. Please give me a like. Hopefully I can grow the channel a little bit between now and that first wild card. And yeah, and I'll be in touch obviously before the game week 2 deadline with some game week 1 reaction and some thoughts on what we're doing ahead of game week 2. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll speak to you all soon.